I lived on the second floor of one of those apartment buildings where all the balconies are stacked directly on top of each other. It's the kind of setup where you don't really think much about your upstairs neighbor until they give you a reason to. For me, that reason came in the form of cigarette butts. At first, it was just one. I remember walking out onto my balcony one morning with a cup of coffee, enjoying the quiet, when I noticed a cigarette filter sitting near the railing. I don't smoke, so it definitely wasn't mine. I figured maybe it blew over somehow. Stuff like that happens, right? Wind, bad aim, who knows? So I picked it up, tossed it in the trash, and didn't think twice about it. But then it happened again. And again. Within a week, I started noticing more of them, little white and brown filters scattered across my balcony floor like they belonged there. Some were fresh, some were old and soggy from rain. It didn't take long to connect the dots. They were coming from upstairs. At that point, I still tried to give the benefit of the doubt. Maybe the guy upstairs didn't realize where they were landing. Maybe he thought they were just falling somewhere out of sight. So I kept cleaning them up. Every couple of days, I'd go outside with a small bag and pick them up, trying not to think too much about how gross it was. It wasn't just the mess, it was the feeling of someone else's habit invading my space. Still, I didn't want to jump straight into confrontation. I told myself it would probably stop. It didn't. One afternoon, I stepped out barefoot, not really paying attention, and nearly stepped on one. That's when it started to annoy me more than anything. It wasn't just inconvenient anymore, it was disrespectful. But the moment that really pushed me over the edge came a few days later. I walked out onto my balcony and noticed a small, dark spot on my outdoor rug. At first, I thought it was dirt, but when I got closer, I realized what it was. A burn mark. A cigarette had clearly landed there while it was still lit. That was it. Now it wasn't just trash, it was damage. And honestly, it could have been worse. If it had landed in the wrong spot, it could have started something serious. So I decided it was time to talk to him. I went upstairs, knocked on his door, and waited. When he opened it, he looked exactly like I expected. Casual, slightly annoyed, like I was interrupting something important. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I live on the second floor of the apartment right below you. I've been finding cigarette butts on my balcony, and one of them actually burned my rug. I think they might be coming from up here." He looked at me for a second. Then he shrugged. Actually shrugged, and said in the most careless tone possible, "Maybe they blow over sometimes." That was it. No apology, no concern, not even a hint that he cared. Just a lazy excuse and a clear message, not my problem. I stood there for a second, waiting to see if he'd say anything else. He didn't, so I nodded slowly and said, "All right," then turned and walked away. But in my head, something had already shifted. Because if that's how he wanted to handle it, if he was going to pretend it wasn't his responsibility, then I wasn't going to keep cleaning up after him like it was mine. I was done being nice about it. And if he didn't want to take responsibility, fine. I'd make sure someone else made him. After that conversation, I completely changed how I handled things. Before, every time I saw a cigarette butt on my balcony, I'd pick it up right away. It was almost automatic. See it, clean it, move on. But now, I stopped. Completely. The next time I found one, I just looked at it and left it exactly where it landed. Then another one showed up. And another. Within a few days, they started to pile up, some near the railing, some closer to the door, and a couple that looked like they had bounced and rolled into random corners. It wasn't pretty, but that was kind of the point. If he didn't care where they ended up, I wasn't going to hide the evidence anymore. But I didn't stop there. I grabbed an empty pasta sauce jar from my kitchen, washed it out, and set it on the small table on my balcony. From that point on, every new cigarette butt that showed up went straight into that jar, one by one, day after day. It didn't take long before it started to look disgusting, a mix of ash, burnt filters, and that stale smell that clings to cigarette waste. Honestly, it made me uncomfortable just looking at it, but I kept going. because now it wasn't just about cleaning up, it was about documenting. I also started taking photos. Every time I noticed a new butt, I'd snap a quick picture, showing where it landed, how many there were, and the condition of my balcony. I made sure the burn mark on the rug was clearly visible in a few of them. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being prepared, because I had a feeling this wasn't going to fix itself. And then, almost like perfect timing, something happened. The building sent out an email. It was one of those general notices that usually get ignored, but this one caught my attention immediately. The subject line mentioned balcony inspections, and when I opened it, I saw exactly what I needed. They were doing inspections that Friday. Reason? Fire hazard complaints. I read that line twice just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Fire hazard. That's exactly what this was. And suddenly, everything clicked. I didn't need to argue with my neighbor again. I didn't need to go back and forth or try to convince him to care. All I had to do was wait. So, that's what I did. I left everything exactly as it was. The scattered cigarette butts stayed on the floor, the burn mark on the rug stayed visible, and the jar, now filled with a pretty solid collection of filters, sat right on the table where anyone could see it. By the time Friday came around, my balcony looked like a clear, undeniable example of the problem. When the property manager finally came by, I was ready. She stepped onto the balcony, took one look around, and paused. I didn't say anything first. I just let her take it in. The mess, the rug, the jar. After a few seconds, I pointed things out calmly. I showed her where the burn mark was, explained what had been happening, and then handed her my phone with the photos I had taken over the past couple of weeks. She scrolled through them quietly. Then she looked at the jar. Really looked at it. Her expression said everything. "Wow," she said. Just one word, but it carried a lot. Then she looked up at me and asked, "This is coming from upstairs?" I nodded. She didn't ask any more questions. She just turned around and headed straight for the stairs, and I knew exactly where she was going. About 15 minutes after the property manager went upstairs, I heard it, a loud slam. Not just a normal door closing, this was the kind of slam that shakes the walls a little bit, the kind that tells you someone is not having a great conversation. I didn't need to guess what was happening. I just stood there in my apartment, quietly listening, feeling a small sense of satisfaction settle in. I didn't hear the actual conversation, but I didn't have to. The timing said everything. She went up there, saw the source, and clearly addressed it. And for the first time since this whole thing started, it felt like the situation was out of my hands, in a good way. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't escalated things directly, I just let the evidence speak. Later that evening, I stepped outside for a bit, mostly out of curiosity. That's when I saw him. He was down near the parking area, pacing slightly, clearly irritated. He didn't see me at first, and I didn't go out of my way to get his attention. I just observed from a distance. After a minute or two, he went back upstairs. I waited a bit, then stepped out onto my balcony again. And that's when I noticed something new. Clipped to the railing of his balcony above mine was a small metal ashtray, the kind designed specifically to hang there, the kind that keeps everything contained. I couldn't help but smile a little. So he did know where the cigarette butts were supposed to go. He just needed a reason to care, and apparently that reason came in the form of a fine. Over the next few days, something amazing happened. Nothing. No new cigarette butts, no ash falling from above, no random mess showing up on my balcony. For the first time in weeks, I walked outside and saw a clean space, my space, exactly how it should have been all along. I gave it a proper cleaning, got rid of the old mess, and finally threw out the jar. Honestly, getting rid of that thing felt symbolic, like closing a chapter. The burn mark on the rug was still there, of course. That part didn't magically fix itself. But in a weird way, I didn't mind it as much anymore. It felt like a reminder, not just of the problem, but of how I handled it. I didn't let it slide. I didn't keep quietly fixing someone else's mess forever. I addressed it, got dismissed, and then handled it in a way that actually worked. And the best part? I didn't have to say another word to him. No follow-up conversation, no awkward apologies, no fake friendliness. Just results. Every now and then, I'd still hear him on his balcony, opening the door, moving around, lighting up. But now, there was a small, distinct sound that came with it. The soft tap of a cigarette being put out, in the ashtray. Exactly where it should have been from the start. And just like that, the problem was solved. Not because he suddenly became considerate, but because he finally had a reason to be. And honestly, that was good enough for me. After I got that email about the balcony inspections, I didn't rush to do anything. I just read it again slowly, making sure I understood every part of it. Fire hazard complaints. That line stuck with me. Because that's exactly what this was. It wasn't just about trash anymore. A lit cigarette had already burned my rug. What if next time it landed on something worse? Dry furniture, a pile of leaves, anything that could actually catch fire. And suddenly, I didn't feel petty about what I was doing. I felt justified. So instead of cleaning anything up before the inspection, like most people probably would, I did the opposite. I made sure everything stayed exactly as it was. If anything, I made it more visible. I moved the jar closer to the center of the table where it couldn't be missed. I didn't rearrange the cigarette butts on the floor. I left them scattered naturally, exactly how they had landed over time. I even adjusted the rug slightly so the burn mark was clearly visible from the doorway. I wasn't trying to exaggerate anything. I was just making sure the truth couldn't be ignored. The night before the inspection, I stepped out onto the balcony and just stood there for a minute looking at everything. It looked bad, messy, gross, not like a place anyone would want to sit and relax. And that's when it really hit me. This wasn't my mess. This wasn't my mess. But for weeks, I had been the one dealing with it, cleaning it, ignoring it, letting it slide. Not anymore. The next morning, I made sure I was home early. I didn't want to miss the inspection window. I didn't want there to be any chance that someone would come by, take a quick look, and leave without really seeing what was going on. Around late morning, I heard movement in the hallway. Voices, footsteps, the usual sounds of management doing rounds. Then a knock on my door. I opened it, and there stood the property manager. She looked professional, but slightly tired, like someone who had already dealt with a few issues that day. "Hi," she said. "We're doing balcony inspections today." "Yeah, I saw the email. You might actually want to see mine." She raised an eyebrow slightly, curious. I stepped aside and gestured toward the balcony. The moment she walked out there, her reaction changed. She stopped. Not dramatically, but enough. Her eyes moved from the floor, to the rug, to the table, and then to the jar. That jar really did all the talking. It wasn't just one or two cigarette butts anymore. It was a collection, enough to show a clear pattern, enough to prove that this wasn't a one-time accident or something that just blew over sometimes. She stepped closer to the table and looked inside. Then she looked back at me. "You've been dealing with this for a while," she asked. "Yeah, I tried talking to the guy upstairs, but he just brushed it off." I kept my tone calm. No exaggeration, no attitude. Just facts. Then I showed her the photos on my phone. I scrolled through them slowly. Different days, different angles, more and more cigarette butts appearing over time. I made sure she saw the burn mark up close in one of the pictures, too. She nodded as she looked through them. Not surprised, more like confirming what she was already seeing. When she handed my phone back, she took one more look around the balcony. Then she said it. "Wow." Just like that. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried weight. You could tell she wasn't just reacting to the mess. She was reacting to the fact that someone had let it get this far. She straightened up, glanced once more at the jar, then back toward the door. "All right," she said. "I'm going to check the unit above you." I nodded. That's where it's coming from. She didn't question it, didn't hesitate. She just walked out, headed straight for the stairs. And as soon as the door closed behind her, I stood there for a second, letting it sink in.
because for the first time since this started, I wasn't the one dealing with it anymore. Now, it was officially his problem.
About 15 minutes after the property manager went upstairs, the whole building got quiet for a second, and then, slam. Not just a normal door close. This was loud, sharp, the kind of slam that makes you instinctively look up even if you already know exactly where it came from. I didn't need to hear the conversation to understand what just happened. That wasn't the sound of a calm discussion. That was the sound of someone getting called out. I stood there in my living room for a moment, just listening. There were a few muffled footsteps above me, some pacing, then silence again. Whatever was set up there, it clearly landed. And honestly, I didn't feel bad. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel like I had gone too far. If anything, I felt relieved. Because I had tried to handle it the simple way first. I went upstairs, knocked on his door, and spoke to him like a normal person. I gave him a chance to fix it without making it a bigger issue. And he shrugged it off. So this was just the next step. Later that evening, I stepped outside for some fresh air, not even for any specific reason, just to clear my head a bit and enjoy the fact that, for once, I didn't feel annoyed walking onto my own balcony. That's when I noticed him. He was outside near the parking lot, pacing back and forth with his hands in his pockets. His shoulders were tense, and even from a distance, you could tell he wasn't in a great mood. He glanced up once toward the building, then looked away quickly when he spotted me. No wave, no acknowledgement, just a quick look and then back to pacing. I didn't say anything either. There was nothing left to say. After a minute or two, he headed back inside and went upstairs. I heard his door open, then close, this time not slammed, just firm. A few moments later, I heard movement above my balcony. The sliding door opened, some light footsteps, then a faint metallic click. I stepped slowly and looked up, and there it was. Clipped neatly to the railing of his balcony was a small metal ashtray. Simple, obvious, exactly the kind of thing that should have been there from the beginning. I just stood there for a second, looking at it, because that one little object said everything. He knew. He always knew. There was never any confusion about where the cigarette butts were supposed to go. There was never a real maybe they blow over sometimes situation. That was just an excuse. What changed wasn't his understanding, it was his consequences. Now there was a reason to care, and suddenly the solution appeared. Funny how that works. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on things, not obsessively, just naturally. Every time I stepped out onto my balcony, I noticed something new. Or rather, I noticed the absence of something. No cigarette butts, no ash scattered across the floor, no fresh mess waiting for me to deal with. For the first time in weeks, my balcony actually looked like mine again. Clean, quiet, normal. After a couple of days of no new debris, I decided it was time to reset everything. I grabbed a trash bag, went outside, and cleaned up what was left from before the inspection. The scattered butts, the bits of ash, everything that had built up over time. It all went into the bag. Then I picked up the jar, that disgusting, overfilled pasta sauce jar that had somehow become my little collection of evidence. I held it for a second, just looking at it. It was gross, no doubt about it, but it also represented something important. It was proof. It was the turning point. Still, I didn't need it anymore, so I sealed it up and tossed it out. That felt good. Not just because I was getting rid of something nasty, but because it meant the problem was actually over. I gave the balcony a proper cleaning after that, swept everything down, wiped the table, and even tried to scrub the burn mark on the rug. It didn't completely come out. A faint dark spot was still there. At first, I thought about replacing the rug entirely, starting fresh. But then I stopped, because that mark, it didn't bother me the way it used to. It wasn't just damage anymore, it was a reminder. A reminder that I drew my line. A reminder that I didn't just accept it and keep cleaning up for someone else forever. I handled it, in my own way, without yelling, without making a scene, but still getting results. And honestly,
That felt better than any argument would have. Over the next couple of weeks, things stayed consistent. Every now and then, I'd hear him step out onto his balcony. The sliding door would open, there'd be a pause, and then I'd hear that same small sound again. A soft tap. The sound of a cigarette being put out. Properly. Exactly where it should have been from day one. We never spoke again after that. No apology, no awkward small talk, no attempt to smooth things over. Just silence. But it wasn't the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that comes when a problem has been settled, even if it wasn't resolved in a friendly way. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Because at the end of the day, I didn't need him to like me. I just needed him to stop treating my space like it didn't matter. And now, he didn't. My balcony stayed clean, my space stayed mine, and all it took was one ignored warning and one well-timed inspection to remind him how things actually work.